Hi, my name is Ken.
And my name is Jason.
And today we're looking at Mousquetaires du Roy. So I'm fairly sure this one's pronounced Mousquetaires du Roy, because Roy is pronounced Wa in French, and Mousquetaire...
But it's spelt with a Y.
Yeah, but it's Wa.
I don't know.
No, I'm pretty sure it's Wa. You know, it's like Patrick Wa.
Who?
He's a hockey player.
Oh, that would explain why I have no idea what you're talking about.
Well, fair enough. At any rate, I'm going to go with Mousquetaires du Roy, but it's translated it means Musketeers of the King. Anyway, regardless of how you want to pronounce it, this is actually a game based on Alexandre Dumas' story, The Three Musketeers. The game itself was actually designed by Francois Combe and a Giles Lehan. So it's not very often you would get a double designer game, but...
There's quite a few out there, actually.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a semi-cooperative action-adventure game with one sort of opposing player, and most of the players are going to be playing as Musketeers and, well, D'Artagnan, and they're trying to stop the other player, Milady, from stealing the Queen's jewels.
First, we're going to go over the components of Mousquetaires du Roy. In case you couldn't already tell, this is the board. These are the quest boards, and are numbered 1 through 4. These are the character cards. There are 4 character cards. There's actually a 5th one as well, but that's only used for a 5-player game when someone's not playing Milady, which I will explain in a moment, with their corresponding character cards, miniatures, and otherwise. These are the cards involved with the game. This is the adventure deck. These are the all-for-one cards. These are just round summary cards. These are the Paris cards. These are the Louvre cards. These are adversary cards, trap cards, location cards, which are used by Milady, and treachery cards. Actually, all 4 of these little decks on the bottom here are used by Milady. And these as well are sort of used by Milady as well, but in a different way. These are some of the various tokens used in the game. We have validation tokens, which are used during the major quests. We have epic tokens, which are used to help you accomplish the major quests. We have various equipment and upgrade sort of tokens. And let's see. Oh, we have the special technique tokens. And of course we have the various tracking tokens that will be placed all across the board. These are the special dice used in the game. As you can see, they have basically a few different sides here. They have a defensive side, this fleur-de-lis, and the sword. And there are red dice and blue dice. The blue dice are used by the Musketeers. The red dice are used by Milady. And finally we have Milady's piece, the screen, and the hourglass.
Alright, so now let's go over the setup for Mousquetaires du Roy. Now, as a note, setup essentially always assumes that you have 5 players. So that's how we're going to be setting this up. We are going to explain how to play with less players in the variants section. So to start off, place the board in the center of the table. Next, place the various tracking tokens on the board. The time marker starts here. The Paris marker starts here. The money token starts on the red point here. The Louvre token goes here. And the blank token goes next to it here. And the La Rochelle token goes here. Next, the equipment and upgrade tokens go into the appropriate spaces on the board here. One player is chosen to take the role of Milady, and this is generally the most experienced player, so in this case it's going to be Ken.
Hi!
Next, Milady and the Musketeers should set up alongside each other.
So Milady takes the screen, her figure, and the hourglass, and places it on their side of the table. Milady takes the appropriate cards associated with her role here. So first she takes the treachery cards and shuffles them all up together, places it behind her screen. Milady draws 3 cards and adds them to her hand of cards. The cards for the Louvre are shuffled and then placed text side up. so you can read the text, but you can't actually see the effect of the card quite yet. Milady can actually go through all the Paris cards and choose one to play first. So I have chosen Weapon Running, which I will explain in a later phase. Next, Milady sets up the quest board. That's actually going to go in this space here. And she sets it up with the appropriate adversary tokens, which admittedly I actually did not show during the components part here, but it's only really relevant at this point now anyway. The remaining adversary tokens go behind her character screen. Take your adversary and trap cards, place them behind the screen as well. You won't be setting these up quite yet. Make sure you have your location cards as well. And that's it for setup for Milady. Now it's up to the Musketeers.
So, first of all, each remaining player chooses a Musketeer. In this case, we're just going to set all 4 of them up. So at this point, each player should be given the actual character card, a heart token, which is placed on the top of the track, an actions and round card, and their figure. Next, shuffle the adventure cards and deal out 5 to each Musketeer. The remaining cards go next to the board. Next, place the Musketeers in their starting locations. So, D'Artagnan starts in Paris, Athos starts in Vue de Colombier, Porthos starts at the Louvre, and Aramis starts at La Rochelle. The all-for-one cards are placed by the board, and the validation and epic tokens are placed near the board as well. Milady starts the game by reading the Paris card.
Weapon Running. A weapon runner secretly supplies weapons to the rebels of La Rochelle. As long as the mission, that would be the Paris card, is not completed, Milady has 1 extra sword in La Rochelle.
Milady then places adversaries and traps. Milady then reads out the current quest.
The Queen's Diamonds at the Golden Lily Inn. On the road to Calris, the Musketeers are trapped in an inn by Milady's agents. To get out, a Musketeer must complete one of the 3 paths. For one action, he moves on 1 space, and the time token is disclosed. If it is a decoy, nothing happens. Otherwise, a fight must take place. So the game is divided up into turns. Each turn is divided into 4 different phases. The first phase is the Milady phase. The Milady phase is split up into 3 parts. There's the destination part, the Paris part, and the treachery part, and I'll explain these in further later. Then comes the Musketeers phase. On the Musketeers phase, each Musketeer actually gets 3 actions. They can do these actions in any order they like. There's no particular way you have to do actions. And there's no particular order in which the Musketeers have to go. I'm going to explain how these actions work a little later, but the actions card actually summarizes this fairly well. Next is the La Rochelle phase. La Rochelle actually gets red dice from Milady's side and blue dice from the Musketeers' side. If the Musketeers had played combat cards at La Rochelle, rather. And again, I will explain that a little further later. Then last we have the end of turn phase. This simply is moving time forward, moving the Louvre time token down here, and resolving any effects Paris may have. Alright, now we're going to explain Milady's turn. So again, this is the first phase of every turn. During the destination part of the Milady phase, Milady chooses one of her location cards, and this allows her to directly affect that location negatively for the Musketeers, unless she's been revealed. If Milady goes to La Rochelle, Richelieu's place, or Milady's place, there's a specific effect that occurs. Whereas if the Musketeers reveal her in the Louvre, Paris, or the main quest, then the Musketeers have to face off against Rochefort. In La Rochelle, she can remove some of the Musketeers' combat cards. In Richelieu's, she can actually affect her treachery cards. And if she goes home to her location, she can actually draw Paris cards. However, Milady's effects are resolved at the very end of the round. During the Paris part of her turn, if Milady has a Paris card in hand, she can actually play it to the Paris spot, and this would actually replace any Paris cards currently in play. During the treachery step, she can choose to play one of her treachery cards, or she can choose to draw one of her treachery cards. Now we're going to explain Phase 2, the Musketeers phase. So again, the Musketeers have 3 actions each. When a Musketeer starts taking their actions, they must take all of their actions. However, the Musketeers can resolve their turns in any order. The actions are simple. 1 action can be spent to draw an adventure card. 1 action can be spent to move to a different location. 1 action can be spent to exchange cards with 1 other Musketeer in the same location. 1 action can be spent to play a character card. These are a specific type of adventure cards. 1 action can be spent to stage a fight in La Rochelle. That means they can actually place one of their combat cards in La Rochelle. 1 action can be spent to attempt a duel. That is to say, if they go to a location where Milady has one of her adversaries, or Milady reveals that she's in a location that one of the Musketeers is in, and reveals that Rochefort is with her in some of the specific locations, then the Musketeers can spend that action dueling one of the characters that's currently present. Or the Musketeers can spend their action by improving or gaining equipment. This would be by spending money or other various ways. As a note for the Musketeers, if you are somehow injured during Milady's phase, and this actually brings you down to no hit points, you would actually be placed during Milady's phase back to the home base of the Musketeers on your side. And rather than get any actions, you would actually just spend your turn standing up and returning your hearts to full. And if the Musketeers have not revealed Milady during their phase, Milady may now reveal and perform an action in her corresponding location, if the Musketeers have not revealed her during their turn. Next we have the Battle of La Rochelle. I'm going to explain this more in the locations part of the game, as I'm going to explain all the individual locations in total. And finally we have the Phase 4, which is the end of turn phase. The time token is moved up a step. The Louvre token is moved down a step. And the Paris card, if it has any further effects, now come into play. Now I'm just going to note how to end the game, although this is not the end of gameplay yet. The game is only won by the Musketeers if the quest for the Queen's Jewels is completed. So that's all 4 quest boards have been completed. The Musketeers win immediately. However, Milady wins if the time token reaches all the way to the end, the Siege of La Rochelle is lost, the Queen has been completely dishonored, or if the Paris card, the Abduction, is in play, it's possible for the Musketeers to lose via that way as well. Next I'm going to go over the individual locations in the game. First off, we have Milady's quarters. While here, Milady can actually choose a Paris card from those she hasn't used yet and add it to her hand. She may then use it at the beginning of the next turn or in subsequent turns. As a note, because this location's name is in red, the Musketeers cannot visit here. Next we have Richelieu's Den. This place is very powerful for Milady. However, if Milady is not present, then the Musketeers are actually going to end up being sent to jail for entering Richelieu's Den. At any rate, Milady's action, she can choose 2 different options if she is here without encountering a Musketeer. She can either choose to draw a Treachery card from the deck and then reshuffle the Treachery card deck, or she can draw as many Treachery cards as she needs to bring her hand up to 3. If the Musketeers enter this location and Milady is actually here with her location cards, she must immediately reveal herself. This actually stops Milady from being able to gain the Treachery cards. However, if Milady is not present, then the Musketeers are sent to La Bastille, which I'll explain in a moment. The Vieux Colombier Hotel is the Musketeers, essentially their place of their home base. Milady cannot actually enter this location. When a Musketeer is out of action, this is to say that they've lost their last life point, they're actually placed laid down here. On the next turn, or if they were placed out of commission during Milady's phase, they actually get to their feet and restore their hearts to full. If they were put here because of Milady's phase, they don't get any actions, but they may take actions normally the next round. They also get to draw an adventure card as well, as noted by the iconography down here. Healthy Musketeers actually can enter here to exchange cards, but for no other purpose. La Bastille is a fortress prison, and the Musketeers are sent there if they do bad things, or things that Cardinal Richelieu does not like. Milady cannot enter this location either. The Musketeers cannot voluntarily go to La Bastille. They're either sent here from Richelieu, or they're sent here from a treachery card played by Milady. To escape the Bastille, it costs 1 action, and it effectively counts as a special form of movement. You can choose to either bribe the guards by paying 1 pistole, that's the currency in this game, so you would move your money counter down a bit. Or you must escape fighting an adversary of 3 points. This means that the adversary would have 3 dice to roll against however many dice you can provide. And I'm going to explain combat later. Regardless of how he escapes, he then places his token back in the View Colombier. Now let's explain Paris. Paris is actually where some of the most frustrating and difficult challenges can come from. When Milady is in Paris, she can bring Rochefort to intervene as soon as a musketeer attempts to overcome a challenge, win a duel, or complete any other missions here. When the musketeers get here, they must attempt to finish the mission laid down by Milady. As soon as the musketeers can meet all the requirements, the card is then permanently discarded, so that means it is removed from game, thrown to box. On certain Paris cards, one of the side is required to achieve a certain amount of successes, usually 6 successes, and this is noted by this tracker here. That's why the very end here doesn't necessarily have an end point, because sometimes the musketeers might use it for their victory, and sometimes Milady might use it for hers. The Constance token, however, is returned to 0 after Paris card is resolved. Paris effects always have a negative or some sort of consequence that come in play at the end of the turn, or just have a basic effect that happens all the way through. For an example, the one currently in play, Milady has 1 extra sword in La Rochelle. That means that whereas normally La Rochelle is determined by this time token, she actually gains 1 extra sword. During Milady's phase, she can choose to have drawn a Paris card and actually play it, and that would actually replace the current Paris card. So that means that all other Paris cards in play, or any other Paris card in play, would be discarded, because there can only ever be 1 in play at a time. Now to explain the Louvre. Milady can have Rochefort intervene here as well. For the Musketeers action, though, they must complete the given mission. So they would have to perform a panache skill check of 7. So they would have to have combined panache of 7. When a quest is completed at the Louvre, the card is discarded immediately. However, the Musketeers actually get a reward equal to the value here. So in this case, the Musketeers would get 3 pistols. However, the very next card is then revealed. This means that the following quest is active immediately. So even if it's possible to complete several Louvre quests in the same round, but it's probably unlikely, and there's probably other things you should be doing at that point in time. Although it will get you quite a few epic tokens, and that's kind of nice too. And then Milady gets to place new strength worth of adversaries and such. At the end of each turn, this time token is put down a step. If the time token ever gets to here, Milady actually gets to draw a treachery card, and the queen is dishonored by 1 step. Otherwise, this is determined. The result of this is determined rather by where the Musketeers resolve their effect. So if they resolve it at the first or second space here, they actually gain 2 epic tokens. If they resolve it here, then the queen is dishonored 1 step, even though they've resolved this positively. If they don't resolve it by this point here, it automatically resolves itself, the queen is dishonored, and we get treachery cards. Rather, the queen is dishonored 2 steps at this point here, I should say, not just 1. So it was at this point, actually, I'm just going to make an amendment to the previous setup, because unfortunately I did actually mess something up here. When Milady is actually placing adversaries and traps, they're placing not strength 3, they're placing strength equal to the strength of the cards in play. So the various Paris cards will have a level of strength associated with them, and the Louvre cards will have a level of strength associated with them as well. In this case here, the one I chose, Weapon Running, does not have a strength value, so no adversaries or traps could be played here. Whereas the Louvre actually has a 2 strength value here, and that means that 2 strength worth of traps and adversaries could be placed, which I've just changed now. I apologize for that. One of the things you will note later that I will be noting is that the rules can be a little confusing for this, and some things may not necessarily be as well explained as they could be. Finally, I'm going to explain La Rochelle. If Milady's in La Rochelle, she reveals herself at the end of Phase 2. Then she actually just gets to discard one of the combat cards in there. For the Musketeers action, when in La Rochelle, a Musketeer can actually place a combat card in this location. Milady and one of the players representing the Musketeers will roll their dice. Milady rolls as many dice as indicated by the time tracker, so it's at least 1, if not all the way up to 4. Certain treachery cards, such as the weapon ring, could give her additional swords. And the Musketeers roll as many blue dice as there are combat cards placed in La Rochelle. There's a character card that allows an extra die to be rolled as well. But however, at most, the Musketeers will only be able to roll 6 dice. Milady can never roll more than 4 dice. However, it is possible for her to just straight up have a bonus sword as per the weapon running thing. So regardless of the results of the dice, Milady is always going to have 1 sword in La Rochelle. If the Musketeers succeed, the time tracker goes this way. If Milady succeeds, the time tracker goes the other way. And again, if it ever reaches Cardinal Richelieu, the game is lost. In La Rochelle, there's actually rewards if the token goes too far to one side. So if the token gets to here, Milady actually gets to draw a treachery card for free. And if it gets to here, of course, Milady wins the game. If it gets to here, the Musketeers actually get an epic token for free, which is pretty sweet. And if it gets to here, the Musketeers actually get an all-for-one card for free. These rewards only happen the first time that these occur, though. Next, I'm going to explain the various aspects of the character, because you may be looking at your character card and wondering, what the heck? So because Athos is green, he's kind of a man, so I'm going to turn around and use him as the example here. All the Musketeers have a special technique. In this particular case, in the case of Aramis, Porthos, and Athos, the special technique is a result of 3 fleur-de-lis on the dice. All the Musketeers have 4 skills. The book represents erudity. The chess piece represents nobility. The rose represents gallantry. And the feather represents panache. All the Musketeers have hit points as well. This is noted by the heart tracker here. All Musketeers have 3 hits before they actually end up going back to their home base. And all Musketeers have a special ability. The special ability of Athos is he gets to ignore Rochefort, so Rochefort cannot actually affect him if he ends up being in the same location as Athos when Milady reveals. Porthos actually gets 2 more hit points, so he's actually a tough bugger. Aramis' special ability is that he can discard 1 adventure card to get +1 to any of his skills if he was going into a skill challenge of some sort. And finally, D'Artagnan. D'Artagnan is the swordsman extraordinaire. He is a master of the duel, and he actually has a better secret maneuver than the other characters. However, he can also still get a second secret maneuver. Whereas all the other characters would replace their secret maneuver, he actually ends up with 2 potential secret maneuvers. And I'm going to explain that further in combat. Now I'm going to explain how challenges work. So challenges are based on the skills of the 3 Musketeers. Well, and D'Artagnan. Again, so it's erudition, nobility, gallantry, and panache. So these could range anywhere till about 8 difficulty, 8 being the highest difficulty as I recall. To complete a challenge, the Musketeer must use their skill in addition to any adventuring cards that they have or any other special things that they have. So in the case of playing adventuring cards, each individual adventure card played, so if you played a nobility card, that would add 1 to your total skill. All cards played are discarded, but if they succeed, they actually get to place a validation token on that check to note that they have completed it. So again, challenges are fairly simple. Take your skills and face them off against the individual things. You don't have to remember the names of the skills. You can just call them book, chess piece, flower, and feather if you want to. because really they don't refer to the names of them themselves. As long as you can reach or beat the number, all is good. So next we're going to go over duels. That's where you get to use the cool dice. Duels take place between a musketeer and an adversary. Musketeers are always rolling blue dice. Milady is always rolling red. Adversaries will have a number of dice equal to whatever the red dice value they have is here. So, say an example, this henchman here is rolling 2 dice. It's a clever iconography, really, because the die that you're actually rolling, or the icon really represents a regular d6, but in this case, it's just supposed to represent that you're rolling that number of d6s, rather than getting a result of that on a d6. Let's say a musketeer is fighting a 2-strength adversary. The musketeer would roll their 3 dice, and actually get their special technique. And the adversary would roll 2 dice. Now, I don't want to explain the special techniques yet, so let's say they rolled this instead. So they've got a result of a sword, a shield, and a fleur. So the adversary's result was 2 shields. So, since in this particular case no one got their special technique, cough cough, the dice results are compared. Swords are compared against shields and are negated by them. Further shields are just simply taken off to the side and ignored. If you have a number of swords in excess of your opponent's shields, you actually damage them. Now, in the case of most adversaries just have 1 wound for all intents and purposes. You wound them, you've defeated them. There are some characters, such as Rochefort and some of the adversaries that Milady has, that actually do have an extra couple of wounds. So again, it's fairly simple. If you roll 3 swords and your adversary rolls 2 shields, they've negated 2 of your swords, but 1 has gone through and you've defeated them, or at least inflicted 1 wound. The same would happen if you had gotten 5 swords compared to their 2 shields. You don't deal extra damage because you got extra swords. However, in the case of the starting example I had here, where it was 2 shields versus a sword, a shield, and a fleur, what would end up happening here is that since the musketeer was not able to deal more swords than the adversary was able to come up with the defense, this means that the combat must continue on, because there is no victor yet in this duel. So, both sides must actually remove one of their dice, and then both sides must roll again. In this particular case, since the adversary has rolled a shield, and the musketeer has rolled a fleur and a shield again, this means that there is still no victor. So another die is removed from both sides. You continue rolling these dice until no dice remain, or one side is the victor. So in this case, the musketeer has still rolled a fleur, which means they still haven't inflicted even 1 sword of damage on their adversary, which means that this ends up being a draw. Alright, back to the lucky happenstance of rolling the special technique. This is the first thing you would check for in a combat, if you roll the special technique. So even if you've rolled all 6 of your dice, only 3 have to actually show up for your special technique, because that's all you need. In this case, the opponent's dice are actually just ignored, and they take a wound. Straight up. You don't have to go through the rest of the dice rolling, or anything like that. You've just simply won the combat. You flip the sword out of their hand, anything you would like. This is how it happened. In the case of D'Artagnan, he may have potentially 2 different secret moves, in which case his either secret move, if either secret move shows up in the dice, then it works either way. It's possible that adversaries may have special techniques, in which case they ignore your blue dice. However, if both sides happen to achieve a secret technique at the same time, then both sides simply take a wound. Essentially, both sides have been ignored in a sense, and they've managed to both stab each other at the same time. If the duel is a draw, or the musketeer fails the duel, then another action must be taken at a later time in order to attempt the duel. You could take the action immediately afterwards if you chose. But remember that you are taking damage here, and unless you're Porthos, you're not going to be able to take too much damage before you have to go back home. In the case of some of the adversaries, you may actually get a reward. So in the case of henchmen, the henchman actually has a coin reward. in which case if you defeated the henchman you would actually go up 1 coin. Another special thing I want to go over is traps. Traps are not just adversaries, they have a special effect that, and they have various effects. I'm not really going to go over this in full, but traps can be very dangerous because they can just simply inflict a wound upon a musketeer with no recourse, and other various nasty things. So be very careful when traps are up. Make sure you read them very carefully so you know what's going on. Okay, now I actually want to go over the various adversary tokens you may encounter in the quests. Knowing what you know right now, these should all be fairly straightforward, but I just want to go over here and do this just because there may be some clarification required. There are some adversaries that simply just have icons. In this case, this is an icon that simply has 2 swords. This is an icon that simply has 2 shields. What this means is this is an adversary that permanently has that effect. So you have to fight, say in the case of the 3 swords, you have to fight off this adversary, and the adversary is considered to have already rolled 3 swords, and they will never lower this amount, even if you have to lower it yourself. If you cannot defeat them, you take wounds and such as normal adversaries would. In this case of the 2 shields, it means that they've rolled 2 shields and that you have to overcome that in order to damage them. I think that's fairly straightforward as well. Some adversaries are simply just your standard red die, so you would just roll that many red dice. Some of the adversary tokens will simply just be 1 damage, so if you revealed this, you would actually just straight take 1 damage. There are some adversary tokens that are actually reserved for specific boards. The skill challenge ones are reserved for the last board, board number 4, so you cannot actually use these until that point. There are some decoy tokens. These are simply blank tokens on both sides, as you see. Those must all be used in the first challenge. And with all adversary tokens, as soon as they are resolved, or when the board is flipped, they're actually discarded permanently. So Milady has exactly enough tokens to go through the entire game by placing all their tokens on the board, but they have to be strategic as to where they place them and what they're going to be doing with them. So again, there's 4 quests. I'm not going to go over these in total, as they're very self-explanatory when you actually get into them. They require you to go through a gauntlet of things. Sometimes you have to fight adversaries. Sometimes the stuff is printed exactly on the card as it is. Regardless, you have to succeed through those things in order to actually go on to the next quest. And when you do finish this quest, you then go to the next quest, of course. Your epic tokens will allow you to actually affect the quest in some way, shape, or form and make it a lot easier. I think there's even one example where epic tokens allow you to just ignore the quest entirely. And I guess the last thing I should probably note is the all-for-one cards. You get 3 very powerful choices with an all-for-one card. You can choose to either stop the time token from moving this round, you can restore 2 honor to the queen, or you can gain 2 epic tokens. So again, these are very powerful. I'm going to explain the equipment and upgrade tokens now. So equipment are the orange tokens. You can get a thoroughbred, which allows you 1 free move action from a place to place once per turn. You can get a pistol, which gives you 1 extra sword in combat, which I know is somewhat ironic. You can get armor, which allows you to have 1 extra defense during a duel. And you can get the Toledo sword, which allows you to reroll 1 die during a duel. You don't have to, but you may want to. Your 2 upgrades. There's Balm, which allows you to restore 2 hit points immediately. However, the token is then removed from the game. There's the upgraded skill. While you have an upgraded skill, and there's 2 tokens for every type of skill in here, your basic score in that skill is increased by 1 permanently. And finally, there is the secret maneuver. You can purchase the secret maneuver, and when you do so, it is placed over your old secret maneuver. Simply, the shield is easier to get than the fleurs, so it makes it easier to get. In the case of D'Artagnan, he actually gets an extra secret maneuver, which is pretty sweet. The upgraded secret maneuver costs 1 combat card, so you actually have to reveal a combat card from your hand and then discard it. An upgraded skill, on the other hand, requires you to simply just discard one of your adventuring cards. And it doesn't matter which one's on the top. The player can actually go through and choose one of the tokens here. I should note that with all the tokens here, there is a limited amount of all of them. If you buy anything more, or if you want to buy anything more than what is there, then, well, you simply can't. You also have a limited inventory space as well. If you'll note, all characters have 2 yellow squares and 2 orange squares. This simply means you can at any point have 2 yellow tokens on your sheet, so in this case it would be upgrades for your skills, and you can have 2 pieces of equipment. You can never have more than 2 pieces of equipment. You can always trade equipment with other Musketeer characters, as though you were if you were in the same location, you would be trading them as though you were trading cards. However, if you have 2 pieces of equipment on your character sheet, and you want to get a 3rd piece, you actually have to choose one of the pieces to discard forever. It is not returned back to the inventory, it is just straight discarded. Finally, I just want to go over how Rochefort works. This is the last thing I really want to touch on in this game. If Milady is in Paris, Le Louvre, or the main quest, she may choose to reveal herself, and by doing so, the Musketeers will have to fight Rochefort. The duel with Rochefort, however, is an interrupting part of the phase. So the Musketeer is saying, "I'm going to do this," and then Milady says, "Well, before you do that, I reveal I'm in that location, and Rochefort comes out of the shadows and attacks you." If the Musketeer is able to defeat Rochefort, he is then able to complete his action, and it does not cost him an additional action to do this. Because, again, Milady is actually interrupting the Musketeer's action rather than the Musketeer having to spend an action to fight Rochefort. Again, Athos is actually able to ignore Rochefort. So Milady cannot actually attack him with Rochefort. So if Rochefort loses at least 1 life point during this duel, Milady has to back out of that location and Rochefort can no longer affect the Musketeers. If Rochefort has not been wounded during the duel, the Musketeer actually loses their action, and Rochefort remains in place. Until Rochefort is removed, he will duel every Musketeer, except Athos, that shows up to that location to complete whatever mission they are on. While Rochefort is out of action, Milady cannot actually go to any of the locations that Rochefort would normally appear. She can't go without her faithful bodyguard. And if the Musketeers actually do take out Rochefort, they actually get an all-for-one card. However, you can only do that once. So you can't actually just mine Rochefort for all-for-one cards. It only happens the first time. To heal Rochefort so that he may travel to locations again, Milady can play a treachery card that gives him life points. There's actually a card that she can play that heals him. So we're going to start the first round of the game. We're keeping weapon running in play, and this is going to be the poison... The Poison Affairs is going to be the Louvre card in play. So we start the game with Milady. So first off, Milady chooses one of her destination cards in secret. Alright, so this is going to be my destination card. The rest of the destination cards are placed behind the screen. She cannot change this during her turn. Second off, Paris, if it has any effects, they happen now. The only effect it happens is that La Rochelle actually gets 1 additional sword result when rolled. So I'm actually going to place this little sword here just to note that effect. And finally, Treachery. I can choose to either draw a new Treachery card or I can play a Treachery card. I'm going to play Backup. Backup allows me to roll 1 additional die at La Rochelle, even if I had already rolled all my dice. In this case, I don't really have very many dice to roll, but I'm trying to put the heat on it for the Musketeers at La Rochelle. So, now it's the Musketeers' turn.
So I'm going to start out with Aramis, mostly because it looks like Kenny is really starting to stack things up on La Rochelle here. So I want to try and deal with that a bit first. And Aramis happens to be there already. So I can take 1 action to place a sword there. Alright, so Aramis happens to have 3 sword cards in hand, so he is going to play all 3 of them. And that is essentially going to be his turn. So next I think I'm going to act with Athos, mostly because he has some pretty potent special cards in his hand that I'd like to use. So first of all, I'm going to play O'Reilly, which costs 1 action and allows each Musketeer to pick 1 adventure card. Next I'm going to play Buckingham, which gets the Musketeers an epic token. And finally, he's going to play Lord de Winter, which allows him to draw 3 adventure cards. Alright, so next I'm going to go with Porthos. So I think it's probably best to move him up to the quest up here. So that's going to be 1 action. And I'm going to take an action to face this token here. So let's see what we have.
So that is going to be a 2 strength adversary.
Alright.
So that means that I'm going to be rolling 2 strength against Jason's combat strength. So Porthos has a combat strength basic of 3. However, he can play a combat card in order to actually increase his combat strength.
I think I'm going to do so just to be sure. I've got a 2 strength combat card.
So that allows you to roll 2 more dice.
So for a total of 5.
So I have 2 swords compared to your a lot of shields and 1 sword. So, my 2 swords are negated by your shields. You have 1 sword to my no shields, which means you successfully wound. Which means that this adversary is defeated.
Alright, and for the final action, I think I'm going to just face the next token along that track.
Alright.
So.
Now that is a wound. That means Porthos is wounded with no chance there. So, tick down. But he has successfully gone through 1 more step.
So that leaves me with D'Artagnan. Now at this point, there's not a whole lot else for him to do. I can't quite get the 7 for panache, and there's no way that I can quite make these skills here. So I think probably the best thing for him to do is to start drawing adventure cards and see if he can get something better. So, for his first action, he's going to draw an adventure card, and that doesn't help greatly. For his second action, he is also going to draw an adventure card, and for his third action, he's going to draw an adventure card.
Alright, so D'Artagnan's made his moves, and that would be the end of the Musketeers phase. Next, we resolve the Battle of La Rochelle. So, as it is right now, Milady has 1 strength, because that's where the time token currently is, so 1 die. In addition, because of backup, I actually get 1 more die. And finally, regardless of my result, I am also considered to have a result of 1 sword on top of everything else. So, this is compared, of course, to the Musketeers' 3 combat cards. So the Musketeers actually get 3 dice. And we compare the results.
This could be close.
So, both of us got a shield. And both of us got 2 swords. So the ending result is a tie. Essentially, it's my 2 swords to the Musketeers' 2 swords. Because it is a tie, the Battle of La Rochelle stays even. There's no actual change in the Battle of La Rochelle. Now we're going to the end of phase part of the turn. So first, the time token is advanced 1 step. The time token at the Louvre is advanced 1 step. And if there are any latent effects of the Paris card, it would come into play, but there is not. However, I'm going to put one of these dice back over here, sword side up, to note that, again, Paris is generating still 1 sword. Now we would go back up to Milady's phase again. So something I forgot to do, actually, was reveal where I was actually at. So I would normally do this at the end of the Musketeers phase. So I was actually visiting Count Richelieu. Or Cardinal Richelieu, rather. Because I was visiting Cardinal Richelieu, this means I can choose to either draw 1 card or draw back up to 3 cards. And I'm just going to draw 1 card. The location card is brought back to me. And now we start again. Alright, so Musketeers of the King. I'm really fond of this game. So this was actually donated to us by Rio Grande. Rather, it was donated to the Nova Scotia Board Gaming Society. They don't... we were asking for like prizes and other games for our collection and such. And they don't give out prize-type games, but they do give out games to be demoed at different events and such. that's how we acquired this one. Honestly, I hadn't even heard about it before they had sent it to us, because it was a 2010 release, and I believe it was 2011 where we actually got these games.
Yeah, just last year.
Yeah, so it was a fairly recent release at that point. And I'm actually really happy with this game. I am very fond of it, but it seems that it's either generally unknown or not very well appreciated. So anyway, Jason, what do you think of this game?
Well, I haven't really had much of an opportunity to play it at all. In fact, the example turns we did were the first time I actually did play it. But from what I've seen, it actually does seem like a pretty decent game. There are a few rules issues, which is a common problem with games, and I think that may possibly be why it's a little bit less known.
That actually, I think, mostly springs from the fact, because the rules themselves aren't particularly complicated, but the rulebook itself is kind of a mess. It's kind of sad, but it has less of a traditional layout than one would kind of expect from your typical board game, and it's kind of hard to find any information that you need at any point in time. Like, I find myself, even as much as I've played this game, I find myself constantly flipping through the rulebook to try to find like clarification on this and that, and there's also just so many little this and that's that you have to consult the rulebook for, which is weird because the game itself has amazing iconography. Like, in each individual location, everything you need to know is right there in front of you, and yet there's all these little picky, niddly things that you have to always go back to the book for. And
well, yeah, I mean, we had to consult the book at least 3 or 4 times while we were playing our example turns, so that should show you. And it's again, that's probably just a factor of the game, the rule book being poorly laid out, because I find if a rule book's well laid out, then it kind of sticks a little bit better. Whereas if it's things all over the place, then you tend not to remember things as well because it's not organized. That might just be me, but I suspect that it's many people.
No, I feel I have a similar sort of stance. I feel like when I'm going through a rule book, I kind of, although I'm not memorizing the rule book, I kind of have a basic idea of the order of operations of the way it's been portrayed to me, and I generally tend to keep that in my head a little bit more than like just the individual pieces. So no, I definitely agree with that, and I feel that for our reviews in general, like we go over like components, setup, gameplay, variants. And I feel, for the most part, that successful rulebooks generally tend to follow that scheme as well, because that's more or less the reason why we structure the show the way we do.
Yeah. In any case, I do enjoy the game. It's the kind of game I would like to play a full game of sometime, but there's always that one thing that might keep a game from being a great game, and that's probably it.
Yeah, for me, it's definitely the rules that really kind of held me back. Unfortunately, the very first time I tried to play this, I was playing it with myself and 2 friends, and we had to probably we were planning on playing a few games that night, and this was one of the games we wanted to play. I think we had to delay the game for about at least 2 hours or so because we were trying to figure out how the heck it played. And that was really sad. When we started playing it, we had a lot of fun with it, though. I mean, we screwed up a bunch of the rules, and a few things were misunderstood. And I mean, heck, this video, I think going through the gameplay and such, may not be our best organized one either, so maybe this won't necessarily help all the way. But we do hope that this is going to help with this game, because this is what I feel this game really needs, is a nice, good tutorial video to kind of tell you, hey, this is what you have to do. And I feel that most people generally tend to learn games a little better when someone's sort of explaining it to them, which is, I think, one of the reasons why our videos, and why we make these videos at all, really.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so Ken, what do you say out of 5?
This is kind of hard for me because I think that there's a lot of faults to this game, but I think that the game itself is very, very, very solid. It kind of reminds me of this Arkham Horror sort of style game where you're in a way sort of playing against the board. Except that the board is being controlled by Milady. And in a way, it sort of reminds me of Manchester Madness a little bit, too. In that regard, that Milady has to sort of set things up and set up traps and things like that. I'd have to say I give this game a 4 out of 5. It's a game I strongly recommend to others. With this video, I would hope it would be easier to play this game. The only things that really hold me back from this being a great game, like a fantastic game, is really the layout of the rules and how some things just seem to be more complicated than what they need to be for the most part. Aside from that, the game is fairly easy to understand and all that jazz. Jason, what do you feel?
Personally, I think I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5 too. Honestly, I was kind of tempted to give it a little bit lower, just because of the rules and all that. But overall, it seems like a pretty solid game, and I think that would be doing it injustice.
All right, well, that's going to give this game a grand total of 8 out of 10 meeples, which means it's a fairly solid game.
Yep. Mm-hmm. All right, so join us next time for Zombies.
And see you next time, and have good games.